Chapter 5 of Organic Gardener's Composting. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betsy Bush in Marquette, Michigan, December 2008. Organic Gardener's Composting by Steve Solomon. Chapter 5 Methods and Variations. Growing the majority of my family's food absorbs all of the energy I care to put into gardening. So my yard is neat but shaggy. Motivated by what I consider total rationality, my lawn is cut only when it threatens to overwhelm the lawnmower, and the lawn is not irrigated, so it browns off and stops growing in summer. I don't grow flowers because I live on a river in a beautiful countryside setting surrounded by low mountains. Nothing I created could begin to compete with what nature freely offers my eye. One untidy bed of ornamentals by the front door are my bow to conventionality. But these fit the entrance's northeast aspect by being Oregon woods natives like ferns, salal, Oregon grape, and an almost wild rhododendron. All these species thrive without irrigation. When I give lectures, I am confronted by the amazing gardening variations that humans are capable of. Some folks' raised vegetable beds are crude low mounds. Then I am shown photographs of squared, paralleled, vertical-walled raised beds, uniformly wrapped in cedar planks. Some gardens are planted in fairly straight rows. Some are laid out in carefully calculated interplanted hexagonal successions, and some are a wild scattering of catch-as-catch-can. Some people don't eat many kinds of vegetables, yet grow large stands of corn and beans for canning or freezing. Others grow small patches of a great many species, creating a year-round gourmet produce stand for their personal enjoyment. Some gardeners grow English-style floral displays, occupying every square inch of their yards and offering a constant succession of color and texture. This chapter presents some of the many different ways people handle the disposal of yard and kitchen wastes. Compost making, like gardening, reflects variations in temperament. You probably weren't surprised at my casual landscaping because you already read about my unkempt compost heap. So I am similarly not surprised to discover backyard composting methods as neat as a German village, as aesthetic as a Japanese garden, as scientific as an engineer would design, and as ugly as containers and other similar methods. In my days of youthful indiscretions, I thought I could improve life on Earth by civilizing high school youth through engendering in them an understanding of history. I confess I almost completely failed and gave up teaching after a few years. However, I personally learned a great deal about history and the telling of history. I read many old journals, diaries, and travel accounts. From some of these documents I gained little, while other accounts introduced me to unique individuals who assisted me in understanding their era. It seemed that what differentiates good from bad reporting is how frank and honest the reporter is about their own personal opinions, prejudices, and outlooks. The more open and direct the reporter, the better the reader can discount inevitable distortions and get a picture of what might really have been there. The more the reporter attempts to be objective by hiding their viewpoints, the less valuable their information. That is why, before discussing those manufactured aids to composting that can make a consumer of you, I want to inform you that I am a frugal person who shuns unnecessary expenditure. I maintain what seems to me to be a perfect justification for my stinginess. I prefer relative unemployment. Whenever I want to buy something, it has become my habit first to ask myself if the desired object could possibly bring me as much pleasure as knowing that I don't have to get up and go to work the next morning. Usually I decide to save the money, so I do not have to earn more. En extremis, I repeat the old Yankee marching chant like a mantra. Make do, wear it out. When it is gone, do without. So I do not own a shredder grinder when patience will take its place. I do not buy or make composting containers when a country lifestyle and not conforming to the neatness standards of others makes bins or tumblers unnecessary. However, I do grudgingly accept that others live differently. Let me warn you that my descriptions of composting aids and accessories are probably a little jaundiced. I am doing my best to be fair. Visual appeal is the primary benefit of making compost in a container. To a tidy, Northern European sense of order, any composting structure will be far neater than the raw beauty of a naked heap. Composting container designs may offer additional advantages, but no single structure will do everything possible. With an enclosure, it may be possible to heat up a pile smaller than 1 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot, because the walls and sometimes the top of the container may be insulating. This is a great advantage to someone with a postage stamp backyard that treasures every square foot. Similarly, wrapping the heap retards moisture loss. Some structures shut out vermin. On the other hand, structures can make it more difficult to make compost. Using a prefabricated bin can prevent a person from readily turning the heap and can almost force a person to also buy some sort of shredder-chipper to first reduce the size of the materials. Also viewed as a depreciating economic asset with a limited lifespan, many composting aids cost as much or more money as the value of all the material they can ever turn out. Financial cost relates to ecological cost, so spending money on short-lived plastic or easily rusted metal may negate any environmental benefit gained from recycling yard wastes. Building your own bin. Probably the best homemade composting design is the multiple bin system, where separate compartments facilitate continuous decomposition. Each bin is about 4 feet on a side and 3 to 4 feet tall. Usually, the dividing walls between bins are shared. Always, each bin opens completely at the front. I think the best design has removable slatted separators between a series of 4, not 3, wooden bins in 3 declining sizes: 2 large, 1 medium-large, and 1 smaller. Alternately, bins may be constructed of unmortared concrete blocks with removable wooden fronts. Permanently constructed bins of mortared concrete block or wood may have moisture-retentive, rain-protective hinged lids. There are 2 workable composting systems that fit these structures. Most composters obtain materials too gradually to make a large heap all at once. In this case, my suggestion is the 4-bin system, using 1 large bin as a storage area for dried vegetation. Begin composting in bin 2 by mixing the dry contents temporarily stored in bin 1 with kitchen garbage, grass clippings, and etc. Once bin 2 is filled and heating, remove its front slats and the side slats separating it from bin 3 and turn the pile into bin 3, gradually reinserting side slats as bin 3 is filled. Bin 3, being about 2/3 the size of bin 2, will be filled to the brim. A new pile can be forming in bin 2 while bin 3 is cooking. When bin 3 has settled significantly, repeat the process, turning bin 3 into bin 4, etc. By the time the material has reheated in bin 4 and cooled, you will have finished or close to finished compost. At any point during this turning that resistant, unrotted material is discovered, instead of passing it on, it may be thrown back to an earlier bin to go through yet another decomposition stage. Perhaps the cleverest design of this type takes advantage of any significant slope or hill available to a lazy gardener and places a series of separate bins, one above the next, eliminating any need for removable side slats, while making tossing compost down to the next container relatively easy. A simply constructed alternative avoids making removable slats between bins or of lifting the material over the walls to toss it from bin to bin. Here, each bin is treated as a separate and discrete compost process. When it is time to turn the heap, the front is removed and the heap is turned right back into its original container. To accomplish this, it may be necessary to first shovel about half of the material out of the bin onto a work area, then turn what is remaining in the bin, and then cover it with what was shoveled out. Gradually, the material in the bin shrinks and decomposes. When finished, the compost will fill only a small fraction of the bin's volume. My clever students at the Urban Farm class, University of Oregon, have made a very inexpensive compost bin structure of this type using recycled industrial wood pallets. They are held erect by nailing them to pressure-treated fence posts stuck into the earth. The removable doors are also pallets, hooked on with baling wire. The flimsy pallets rot in a couple of years, but obtaining more free pallets is easy. If I were building a more finished 3 or 4 bin series, I would use rot-resistant wood like cedar and/or thoroughly paint the wood with a non-phytotoxic wood preservative like cuprinol, copper naphthenate. Cuprinol is not as permanent as other types of wood preservatives and may have to be reapplied every 2 or 3 years. Bins reduce moisture loss, and wood bins have the additional advantage of being fairly good thermal insulators. 1 inch of wood is as much insulation as 1 foot of solid concrete. Composting containers also have a potential disadvantage reducing airflow, slowing decomposition, and possibly making the process go anaerobic. Should this happen, airflow can be improved by supporting the heap on a slatted floor made of up-ended cuprinol-treated 2x4s about 3 inches apart tacked into the back wall. Air ducts inexpensively made from perforated plastic septic system leach line are laid between the slats to greater enhance airflow. I wouldn't initially build a bin array with ducted floors. These can be added as an afterthought if necessary. Much simpler bins can be constructed out of 2-inch by 4-inch mesh by 36-inch or 48-inch high strong welded wire fencing, commonly called turkey wire or hog wire. The fencing is formed into cylinders 4 or 5 feet in diameter. I think a serious gardener might need 1 5-foot circle and 2 4-foot diameter ones. Turkey wire is stiff enough to support itself when formed into a circle by hooking the fence upon itself. This home-rolled wire bin system is the least expensive of all. As compostable materials are available, the wire circle is gradually filled. Once the bin has been loaded and has settled somewhat, the wire may be unhooked and peeled away. The material will hold itself in a cylindrical shape without further support. After a month or 2, the heap will have settled significantly and will be ready to be turned into a smaller wire cylinder. Again, the material is allowed to settle, and then, if desired, the wire may be removed to be used again to form another neatly shaped heap. Wire-enclosed heaps encourage air circulation, but can also encourage drying out. Their proper location is in full shade. In hot, dry climates, moisture retention may be improved by wrapping a length of plastic sheeting around the outside of the circle, and if necessary, by draping another plastic sheet over the top. However, doing this limits airflow and prevents removal of the wire support. You may have to experiment with how much moisture retention the heap can stand without going anaerobic. To calculate the length of wire, circumference, necessary to enclose any desired diameter, use the formula circumference equals diameter times 3.14. For example, to make a 5-foot circle, 5 times 3.14 equals approximately 16 feet of wire. With the exception of the tumbler, commercially made compost bins are derived from one of these 2 systems. Usually, the factory-made wire bins are formed into rectangles instead of circles and may be made of PVC-coated steel instead of galvanized wire. I see no advantage in buying a wire bin over making one, other than supporting unnecessary stages of manufacture and distribution by spending more money. Turkey wire fencing is relatively inexpensive and easy enough to find at farm supply and fencing stores. The last time I purchased any, it was sold by the lineal foot, much as hardware cloth is dispensed at hardware and building supply stores. Manufactured solid-sided bins are usually constructed of sheet steel or recycled plastic. In cool climates, there is an advantage to tightly constructed plastic walls that retain heat and facilitate the decomposition of smaller thermal masses. Precise construction also prevents access by larger vermin and pets. Mice, on the other hand, are capable of squeezing through amazingly small openings. Promotional materials make composting in pre-manufactured bins seem easy, self-righteously ecological, and effortless. However, there are drawbacks. It is not possible to readily turn the materials once they've been placed into most composters of this type, unless the entire front is removable. Instead, new materials are continuously placed on top, while an opening at the bottom permits the gardener to scrape out finished compost in small quantities. Because no turning is involved, this method is called passive composting. But to work well, the ingredients must not be too coarse and must be well mixed before loading. Continuous bin composters generally work fast enough when processing mixtures of readily decomposable materials like kitchen garbage, weeds, grass clippings, and some leaves. But if the load contains too much fine grass or other gooey stuff and goes anaerobic, a special compost aerator must be used to loosen it up. Manufactured passive composters are not very large. Compactness may be an advantage to people with very small yards or who may want to compost on their terrace or porch. But if the C to N of the materials is not favorable, decomposition can take a long time, and several bins may have to be used in tandem. Unless they are first ground or chopped very finely, larger, more resistant materials like corn, Brussels sprouts, sunflower stalks, cabbage stumps, shrub prunings, etc. will constipate a top-loading, bottom-discharging composter. The compost tumbler is a clever method that accelerates decomposition by improving aeration and facilitating frequent turning. A rotating drum holding from 8 to 18 bushels, the larger sizes look like a squat, fat, oversized oil drum, is suspended above the ground, top-loaded with organic matter, and then tumbled every few days for a few weeks until the materials have decomposed. Then the door is opened and finished compost falls out the bottom. Tumblers have real advantages. Frequent turning greatly increases air supply and accelerates the process. Most tumblers retard moisture loss too because they are made of solid material, either heavy plastic or steel with small air vents. Being suspended above ground makes them immune to vermin, and frequent turning makes it impossible for flies to breed. Tumblers have disadvantages that may not become apparent until a person has used one for a while. First, although greatly accelerated, composting in them is not instantaneous. Passive bins are continuous processors while, with the exception of one unique design, tumblers are batch processors, meaning that they are first loaded and then the entire load is decomposed to finished compost. What does a person do with newly acquired kitchen garbage and other waste during the 2 to 6 weeks that they are tumbling a batch? One handy solution is to buy 2 tumblers and be filling one while the other is working. But tumblers aren't cheap. The more substantial ones cost $250 to $400 plus freight. There are other less obvious tumbler disadvantages that may negate any work avoided, time saved, or sweaty turning with the manure fork eliminated. Being top-loaded means lifting compost materials and dropping them into a small opening that may be shoulder height or more. These materials may include a sloppy bucket of kitchen garbage. Then, a tumbler must be tumbled for a few minutes every 2 or 3 days. Cranking the lever or grunting with the barrel may seem like fun at first, but it can get old fast. Decomposition in an untumbled tumbler slows down to a crawl. Both the passive compost bin and the highly active compost tumbler work much better when loaded with small-sized particles. The purchase of either one tends to impel the gardener to also buy something to cut and/or grind compost materials. The UC method, grinder shredders. During the 1950s, mainstream interest in municipal composting developed in America for the first time. Various industrial processes already existed in Europe. Most of these were patented variations on large and expensive composting tumblers. Researchers at the University of California set out to see if simpler methods could be developed to handle urban organic wastes without investing in so much heavy machinery. Their best system, named the UC Fast Compost Method, rapidly made compost in about 2 weeks. No claim was ever made that UC method produces the highest quality compost. The idea was to process and decompose organic matter as inoffensively and rapidly as possible. No attempt is made to maximize the product's C to N as is done in slower methods developed by Howard at Indore. Most municipal composting done in this country today follows the basic process worked out by the University of California. Speed of decomposition comes about from very high internal heat and extreme aerobic conditions. To achieve the highest possible temperature, all of the organic material to be composted is first passed through a grinder and then stacked in a long, high windrow. Generally, the height is about 5 to 6 feet. Any higher causes too much compaction. Because the material is stacked with sides as vertical as possible, the width takes care of itself. Frequent turning with machinery keeps the heap working rapidly. During the initial experiments, the turning was done with a tractor and front-end loader. These days, giant U-shaped machines may roll down windrows in municipal composting plots, automatically turning, reshaping the windrow, and if necessary, simultaneously spraying water. Some municipal waste consists of moist kitchen garbage and grass clippings. Most of the rest is dry paper. If this mixture results in a moisture content that is too high, the pile gets soggy, sags promptly, and quickly goes anaerobic. Turning not only restores aerobic conditions, but also tends to drop the moisture content. If the initial moisture content is between 60 and 70%, the windrow is turned every 2 days. 5 such turns, starting 2 days after the windrow is first formed, finishes the processing. If the moisture content is between 10 and 60%, the windrow is first turned after 3 days and thence at 3-day intervals, taking about 4 turns to finish the process. If the moisture content is below 40% or drops below 40% during processing, moisture is added. No nuisances can develop if turning is done correctly. Simply flipping the heap over or adding new material on top will not do it. The material must be blended so that the outsides are shifted to the core and the core becomes the skin. This way, any fly larvae, pathogens, or insect eggs that might not be killed by the cooler temperatures on the outside are rotated into the lethal high heat of the core every few days. The speed of the UC method also appeals to the backyard gardener. At home, frequent turning can be accomplished either in naked heaps or by switching from one bin to the next and back, or with a compost tumbler. But a chipper shredder is also essential. Grinding everything that goes into the heap has other advantages than higher heat and accelerating processing. Materials may be initially mixed as they are ground, and small particles are much easier to turn over than long twigs, tough straw, and other fibrous materials that tie the heap together and make it difficult to separate and handle with hand tools. Backyard shredders have other uses, especially for gardeners with no land to waste. Composting tough materials like grape prunings, berry canes, and hedge trimmers can take a long time. Slow heaps containing resistant materials occupy precious space. With a shredder, you can fast compost small limbs, tree prunings, and other woody materials like corn and sunflower stalks. Whole autumn leaves tend to compact into airless layers and decompose slowly, but dry leaves are among the easiest of all materials to grind. Once smashed into flakes, leaves become a fluffy material that resists compaction. Electric-driven garden chipper shredders are easier on the neighbor's ears than more powerful gasoline-powered machines, although not so quiet that I'd run one without ear protection. Electrics are light enough for a strong person to pick up and carry out to the composting area and keep secured in a storeroom. One more plus, there never is any problem starting an electric motor, but no way to conveniently repair one either. There are 2 basic shredding systems. One is the hammer mill, a grinding chamber containing a rotating spindle with steel tines or hammers attached that repeatedly beat and tears materials into smaller and smaller pieces until they fall out through a bottom screen. Hammer mills will flail almost anything to pieces without becoming dulled. Soft green materials are beaten to shreds. Hard, dry, brittle stuff is rapidly fractured into tiny chips. Changing the size of the discharge screen adjusts the size of the final product. By using very coarse screens, even soft, wet, stringy materials can be slowly fed through the grinding chamber without hopelessly tangling up in the hammers. Like a coarse power planer in a wood shop, the other type of machine uses sharpened blades that slice thin chips from whatever is pushed into its maw. The chipper is designed to grind woody materials like small tree limbs, prunings, and berry canes. Proper functioning depends on having sharp blades, but edges easily become dulled and require maintenance. Care must be taken to avoid passing soil and small stones through a chipper. Soft, dry, brittle materials like leaves will be broken up but aren't processed as rapidly as in a hammer mill. Chippers won't handle soft, wet stuff. When driven by low horsepower electric motors, both chippers and hammer mills are light-duty machines. They may be a little shaky standing on spindly legs or small platforms, so materials must be fed in gently. Most electric models cost between $300 and $400. People with more than a postage stamp yard who like dealing with machinery may want a gasoline-powered shredder chipper. These are much more substantial machines that combine both a big hammer mill shredder with a side-feeding chipper for limbs and branches. Flailing within a hammer mill or chipping limbs of 2 or more inches in diameter focuses a great deal of force. Between the engine noise and the deafening din as dry materials bang around the grinding chamber, ear protection is essential. So are safety goggles and heavy gloves. Even though the fan belt driving the spindle is shielded, I would not operate one without wearing tight-fitting clothes. When grinding dry materials, great clouds of dust may be given off. Some of these particles, like the dust from alfalfa or from dried-out spoiled, moldy hay, can severely irritate lungs, eyes, throat, and nasal passages. A face mask, or better, an Army surplus gas mask with built-in goggles may be in order, and you'll probably want to take a shower when finished. Fitted with the right size screen selected from the assortment supplied at purchase, something learned after a bit of experience, powerful hammer mills are capable of pulverizing fairly large amounts of dry material in short order, but wet stuff is much slower to pass through and may take a much coarser screen to get out at all. Changing material may mean changing screens, and that takes a few minutes. Dry leaves seem to flow through as fast as they can be fed in. The side feed auxiliary chippers incorporated into hammer mills will make short work of smaller green tree limbs, but dry, hardened wood takes a lot longer. Feeding large, hard branches too fast can tear up chipper blades and even break the ball bearing housings holding the spindle. Here I speak from experience. Though advertisements for these machines make them seem effortless and fast, shredders actually take considerable time, energy, skilled attention, constant concentration, and experience. When grinding, one must attentively match the inflow to the rate of outflow, because if the hopper is overfilled, the tines become snarled and cease to work. For example, tangling easily can occur while rapidly feeding in thin, brittle flakes of dry, spoiled hay, and then failing to slow down while a soft, wet flake is gradually introduced. To clear a snarled rotor without risking continued attachment of one's own arm, the motor must be killed before reaching into the hopper and untangling the tines. To clear badly clogged machines, it may also be necessary to first remove and then replace the discharge screen, something that takes a few minutes. There are significant differences in the quality of materials and workmanship that go into making these machines. They all look good when freshly painted. It is not always possible to know what you have bought until a season or two of heavy use has passed. One tried and true aid to choosing quality is to ask equipment rental businesses what brand their customers are not able to destroy. Another guide is to observe the brand of gasoline engine attached. In my gardening career, I've owned quite a few gas-powered rotary tillers and lawn mowers, and one 8-horsepower shredder. In my experience, there are 2 grades of small gasoline engines: consumer and the genuine industrial. Like all consumer merchandise, consumer-grade engines are intended to be consumed. They have a design life of a few hundred hours and then are worn out. Most parts are made of soft, easily machined aluminum, reinforced with small amounts of steel in vital places. There are two genuinely superior American companies, Kohler and Wisconsin, that make very durable, long-lasting gas engines commonly found on small industrial equipment. With proper maintenance, their machines are designed to endure thousands of hours of continuous use. I believe small gas engines made by Yamaha, Kawasaki, and especially Honda are of equal or greater quality to anything made in America. I suggest you could do worse than to judge how long the maker expects their shredder-chipper to last by the motor it selects. Gasoline-powered shredder-chippers cost from $700 to $1,300. Back in the early 1970s, I wore one pretty well out in only 1 year of making fast compost for a half-acre biodynamic French intensive market garden. When I amortized the cost of the machine into the value of both the compost and the vegetables I grew with the compost, and considered the amount of time I spent running the grinder against the extra energy it takes to turn ordinary slow compost heaps, I decided I would be better off allowing my heaps to take more time to mature. Sheet composting. Decomposition happens rapidly in a hot compost heap, with the main agents of decay being heat-loving microorganisms. Decomposition happens slowly at the soil's surface, with the main agents of decay being soil animals. However, if the leaves and forest duff on the floor of a forest or a thick matted sod are tilled into the topsoil, decomposition is greatly accelerated. For 2 centuries, frontier American agriculture depended on just such a method. Early pioneers would move into an untouched region, clear the forest, and plow in millennia of accumulated nutrients held as biomass on the forest floor. For a few years, perhaps a decade, or even 20 years if the soil carried a higher level of mineralization than the average, crops from forest soils grew magnificently. Then, unless other methods were introduced to rebuild fertility, yields, crop, animal, and human health all declined. When the less leached grassy prairies of what we now call the Midwest were reached, even greater bounties were mined out for more years because rich black soil grasslands contain more mineral nutrients and sod accumulates far more humus than do forests. Sheet composting mimics this system while saving a great deal of effort. Instead of first heaping organic matter up, turning it several times, carting humus back to the garden, spreading it, and tilling it in, sheet composting conducts the decomposition process with far less effort right in the soil needing enrichment. Sheet composting is the easiest method of all. However, the method has certain liabilities. Unless the material being spread is pure manure without significant amounts of bedding or only fresh spring grass clippings or alfalfa hay, the carbon-nitrogen ratio will almost certainly be well above that of stable humus. As explained earlier, during the initial stages of decay, the soil will be thoroughly depleted of nutrients. Only after the surplus carbon has been consumed will the soil ecology and nutrient profile normalize. The time this will take depends on the nature of the materials being composted and on soil conditions. If the soil is moist, airy, and warm, and if it already contained high levels of nutrients, and if the organic materials are not ligninous and tough and have a reasonable C/N, then sheet composting will proceed rapidly. If the soil is cold, dry, clayey, relatively airless, or infertile and/or the organic matter consists of things like grain straw, paper, or the very worst, barkless sawdust, then decomposition will be slowed. Obviously, it is not possible to state with any precision how fast sheet composting would proceed for you. Autumn leaves usually sheet compost very successfully. These are gathered, spread over all of the garden, except for those areas intended for early spring sowing, and tilled in as shallowly as possible before winter. Even in the north, where soil freezes solid for months, some decomposition will occur in autumn and then in spring as the soil warms. Composting instantly resumes and is finished by the time frost danger is over. Sheet composting higher C/N materials in spring is also workable when the land is not scheduled for planting early. If the organic matter has a low C/N like manure, a tender green manure crop not yet forming seed, alfalfa hay or grass clippings, quite a large volume of material can be decomposed by warm soil in a matter of weeks. However, rotting large quantities of very resistant material like sawdust can take many months, even in hot, moist soil. Most gardeners cannot afford to give their valuable land over to being a compost factory for months. One way to speed the sheet composting of something with a high C/N is to amend it with a strong nitrogen source like chicken manure or seed meal. If sawdust is the only organic matter you can find, I recommend an exception to avoiding chemical fertilizer. By adding about 80 pounds of urea to each cubic yard of sawdust, its overall C/N is reduced from 500 to 1 to about 20 to 1. Urea is perhaps the most benign of all chemical nitrogen sources. It does not acidify the soil, is not toxic to worms or other soil animals or microorganisms, and is actually a synthetic form of the naturally occurring chemical that contains most of the nitrogen in animal urine. In that sense, putting urea in soil is not that different than putting synthetic vitamin C in a human body. Burying kitchen garbage is a traditional form of sheet composting practiced by row cropping gardeners, usually in mild climates where the soil does not freeze in winter. Some people use a post hole digger to make a neat 6 to 8 inch diameter hole about 18 inches deep between well-spaced growing rows of plants. When the hole has been filled to within 2 or 3 inches of the surface, it is topped off with soil. Rarely will animals molest buried garbage. It is safe from flies, and yet enough air exists in the soil for it to rapidly decompose. The local soil ecology and nutrient balance is temporarily disrupted, but the upset only happens in this one little spot, far enough away from growing plants to have no harmful effect. Another garbage disposal variation has been called trench composting. Instead of a post hole, a long trench about the width of a combination shovel and a foot deep is gradually dug between row crops spaced about 4 feet, or more, apart. As bucket after bucket of garbage, manure, and other organic matter are emptied into the trench, it is covered with soil dug from a little further along. Next year, the rows are shifted 2 feet over so that crops are sown over the composted garbage. Mulch gardening. Ruth Stout discovered, or at least popularized, this new-to-her method. Mulching may owe some of its popularity to Ruth's possession of writing talent similar to her brother Rex's, who was a well-known mid-century mystery writer. Ruth's humorous book, Gardening Without Work, is a fun-to-read classic that I highly recommend, if for no other reason than it shows how an intelligent person can make remarkable discoveries simply by observing the obvious. However, like many other garden writers, Ruth Stout made the mistake of assuming that what worked in her own backyard would be universally applicable. Mulch gardening does not succeed everywhere. This easy method mimics decomposition on the forest floor. Instead of making compost heaps, or sheet composting, the garden is kept thickly covered with a permanent layer of decomposing vegetation. Year-round mulch produces a number of synergistic advantages. Decay on the soil's surface is slow but steady and maintains fertility. As on the forest floor, soil animals and worm populations are high. Their activities continuously loosen the earth, steadily transport humus and nutrients deeper into the soil, and eliminate all need for tillage. Protected from the sun, the surface layers of soil do not dry out, so shallow feeding species like lettuce and moisture lovers like radishes make much better growth. During high summer, mulched ground does not become unhealthfully heated up either. The advantages go on. The very top layer of soil directly under the mulch has a high organic matter content, retaining moisture, eliminating crusting, and consequently enhancing the germination of seeds. Mulchers usually sow in well-separated rows. The gardener merely takes back the mulch and exposes a few inches of bare soil, scratches a furrow, and covers the seed with humusy topsoil. As the seedlings grow taller and are thinned out, the mulch is gradually pushed back around them. Weeds? No problem. Except where germinating seeds, the mulch layer is thick enough to prevent weed seeds from sprouting. Should a weed begin showing through the mulch, this is taken as an indication that spot has become too thinly covered and a flake of spoiled hay or other vegetation is tossed on the unwanted plant, smothering it. Oh, how easy it seems! Pick a garden site. If you have a year to wait before starting your garden, do not even bother to till first. Cover it a foot deep with combinations of spoiled hay, leaves, grass clippings, and straw. Woody wastes are not suitable because they won't rot fast enough to feed the soil. Kitchen garbage and manures can also be tossed on the earth and for a sense of tidiness covered with hay. The mulch smothers the grass or weeds growing there and the site begins to soften. Next year it will be ready to grow vegetables. If the plot is very infertile to begin with, there won't be enough biological activity or nutrients in the soil to rapidly decompose the mulch. In that case, to accelerate the process, before first putting down mulch, till in an initial manure layer or a heavy sprinkling of seed meal. Forever after, mulching materials alone will be sufficient. Never again till. Never again weed. Never again fertilize. No compost piles to make, turn, and haul. Just keep your eye open for spoiled hay and buy a few inexpensive tons of it each year. Stout, who discovered mulch gardening in Connecticut, where irregular summer rains were usually sufficient to water a widely spaced garden, also mistakenly thought that mulched gardens lost less soil moisture because the earth was protected from the drying sun and thus did not need irrigation through occasional drought. I suggest that drought resistance under mulch has more to do with the plant's ability to feed vigorously, obtain nutrition, and continue growing because the surface inches, where most of the soil nutrients and biological activities are located, stayed moist. I also suspect that actual measurable moisture loss from mulched soil may be greater than from bare earth, but that's another book I wrote called Gardening Without Irrigation. Yes, gardening under permanent year-round mulch seems easy, but it does have a few glitches. Ruth Stout did not discover them because she lived in Connecticut, where the soil freezes solid every winter and stays frozen for long enough to set back population levels of certain soil animals. In the north, earwigs and sowbugs, pillbugs, are frequently found in mulched gardens, but they do not become a serious pest. Slugs are infrequent and snails don't exist, all thanks to winter. Try permanent mulch in the deep south or California, where I was first disappointed with mulching, or the maritime Northwest, where I now live, and a catastrophe develops. During the first year, these soil animals are present but cause no problem. But after the first mild winter with no population setback, they become a plague. Slugs, and in California snails, will be found everywhere, devastating seedlings. Earwigs and sowbugs that previously only were seen eating only decaying mulch began to attack plants. It soon becomes impossible to get a stand of seedlings established. The situation can be rapidly cured by raking up all the mulch, carting it away from the garden, and composting it. I know this to be the truth, because I've had to do just that, both in California, where as a novice gardener I had my first mulch catastrophes, and then when I moved to Oregon, I gave mulching another trial with similar sad results. Shredder chippers and other power equipment. I've been watching this market change rapidly since the early 1970s. Manufacturers come and go. Equipment is usually ordered direct from the maker, freight extra. Those interested in large horsepower shredder chippers might check the advertisements in garden-related magazines such as National Gardening, Organic Gardening, Sunset Horticulture, Fine Gardening, Country Living, Harrowsmith, etc. Without intending any endorsement or criticism of their products, two makers that have remained in business since I started gardening are Kemp Company, 160 Kosher Road, Lidditz, Pennsylvania, 17543, also compost drums. Troy-Bilt Manufacturing Company, 102 D Street and 9th Avenue, Troy, New York, 12180. Mail order catalog sources of compost containers and garden accessories. Gardens Alive, 5100 Shenley Place, Lawrenceburg, Indiana, 47025. Gardener's Supply Company, 128 Intervale Road, Burlington, Vermont, 05401. Ringer Corporation, 9959 Valley View Road, Eden Prairie, Minnesota, 55344. Smith & Hawken, 25 Court Madeira, Mill Valley, California, 94941. End of Chapter 5.